Hey, what's up? This is Corey Glenn, and I'm going to be talking in this video today about this is a topic I don't really see much information on, and that is whether or not to use a post dam in digital dentures, and then also what type of a post dam. And so if you've been around this for a while, you'll know that a lot of people say that they don't recommend using a posterior palatal seal or a post dam in digital dentures because you don't get the shrinkage when 3D printing or milling that you would expect to get with conventional packed and processed dentures. And I've done them both ways, and truthfully I haven't been able to tell a huge difference either way in the suction and fit until I tried this, at least new to me, type of post dam. And so I got to give a shout out to my buddies Brandon Allison and Russell Schaefer. They also teach some digital denture courses. But they turned me on to this concept of a Luckman post dam, Luckman post dam. And I'd never heard of it, and so obviously never tried it. But I, just as an experiment, made a denture with one of these, and I was absolutely blown away with how much retention that denture had. I mean, you often hear people say there was so much suction that you had a hard time getting it out. I'm telling you, I literally had a hard time getting the denture out of this guy's mouth. And I did the same denture side by side as a split test. I did the exact same denture, one with this post dam, one without. And it was a night and day difference. And so it's not like I have a huge sample size to compare this against, but I am telling you that the couple of cases that I've played with where we did these, it was just amazing how much retention. And so here's what a Luckman post dam looks like. Here is the standard mastered model on the left, and then here's the exact same master model, but with that Luckman post dam built into it. And so in talking about this with them, they turned me on to a web page that describes how to make this. And so here's the web page. I'm going to put a link to it in the description so that you can go there. But turns out this is actually created by Tim Lane, who is a really excellent removable technician that I actually used some back when I was practicing. And go figure, he has a great little PDF tutorial on how to do these. So I'm going to go through how he shows to make it. But then the challenge that arises is, I'm doing everything digitally. And so whereas with a stone model, it's pretty easy to just draw this, carve it in. I can't really do that on digital models. And so I had to come up with a way to do this digitally. And so I'll go through how I'm creating these on digital models as opposed to stone. But if you go to Tim's page on this, you can see what he's going to have you do is go ahead and circle the incisive papilla and then put a little line at each hamular notch. And then you're just going to draw this little arc or this bow that connects those. All right, you kind of want smooth flowing lines. Then you're going to set the anterior-most border just behind the rugae. All right, so right here, if you can see my mouse, that would be where we would end that. And so here you can see that drawn in, connecting those lines. And then you're going to basically find the dead middle of your cast and then kind of draw a midway line between there and your hamular notch. All right, so right here. And so you want this to come straight back off of that arcing line. So now we end up with just this one U shape right in the center of the palate. Do that on both sides. And then go ahead and turn this into a circle. So a Luckman post dam, it's almost going to look like someone has stuck a thumbprint right into the center of the denture. Imagine this being your thumb right here. All right, and so here's what Tim recommends doing on this. If you look at the very most posterior, a traditional post dam location, that posterior border is going to come just to those fovea palatinae, which are the little glandular things in the posterior palate, right beside where it switches hard to soft. That and this U shape, you're going to carve in to 1 millimeter deep. All right, and then you've still got these remaining lines, right? And so these remaining areas that have had nothing carved in, you're actually going to taper those out to about a 0.5 millimeter of depth. And then Tim mentions that this is optional. I did this on the ones that I've done, but I can't tell you, difference between doing this or not. But he's actually coming in here and building a positive relief in the inside of that circular area where the thumb would be, right? And so you can imagine this would create actual space under there when it's fully seated. And I think the effect that that has is kind of like a suction cup, right? If it gives a place for this air to reside, which when you jam that thing home, compresses that air, drives it out, and then when that pressure is released, you've got a suction cup effect in the palate of that patient's tissue. All right. And so I'm going to just go through now how I do this digitally and create one of these Luckman post dams I'm going to use Mesh Mixer. You could do a number of different softwares. Mesh Mixer is kind of where my comfort zone is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one. And let's just start from the point that we've just got our upper master model. All right. So one of the reasons I like to use Mesh Mixer, again, you could do this in any number of programs, but the reason I like to use Mesh Mixer is this feature it has of being able to generate face groups. So what do I mean by that? Well, you saw Tim was drawing all these outlines and things on the model. How do we do that and actually be able to see them on a digital model? Well, in Mesh Mixer, if I use the select tool here, right? I'm going to first come up here and just use the select tool to identify my incisive papilla. All right. I could take that same select tool and just decrease the size on it, and we could identify our hamular notches. All right, so I'm going to draw in hamular notches here. Right there, that's your fovea palatinae. All right, so I could mark and make a little dot here that just represents kind of the posterior border and the midline of my cast. All right, so when you've got a selection in Mesh Mixer created, if you were to go to this drop-down box under Modify, you can create a face group, or you'll see the hotkey for any of these features. It's Control G. I usually use the hotkeys, so if I hold Control on my keyboard and G, if you notice what that's done, it hasn't changed the mesh or anything like that. It's just created what's called a face group. All right, it's broken that area of the mesh into a different color zone. And this is useful because now if I have a different face group, when I click on the select tool, if I was to just double click that, it would select all of that color that's connected to it. All right, and that's going to be useful for us here. So let's go ahead and try to draw that little arc that Tim showed in his tutorial. All right, so again, using select tool, I'm going to get a spot size, I don't know, 24, let's say. There's no exact science to this. All right, again, I don't have a huge caseload to refer you to on this. I'm just referencing this off the few cases that I've done. All right, so I'm going to connect there, and then I try to keep these symmetric. And so I'm constantly referencing that midline palatal ref A. All right, and then if you're using Mesh Mixer, it's a select tool when you're holding the left mouse. If I was to hold the shift key down and the left mouse, then it becomes an erase tool. So if you didn't feel like your lines were exactly on, you can go and modify these, smooth them out, whatever. All right, so I'm just kind of looking, here I see my midline. I'm a little farther away on this side than I am on this one. So I'm going to push this over just a bit. And again, just try to get consistent line sizes and make them nice and smooth and flowing. All right, so there's the first lines that he showed in this tutorial. All right, once again, I can always, at any point, I can just hit Control G, and that creates a face group. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delineate my very most posterior border, and so that's for me going to come from that fovea palatinae, and it will merge into the hamular notches. All right, and if I wanted to make that all continuous one face group with these previous lines that I've drawn, I could double click those and Control G. Again, now that's all one continuous face group. All right, where are the end of the rugae? All right, so not very defined rugae on this patient. And this is one of the things that impressed me so much is this this is not a great ridge form. This guy's been missing teeth a long time, not much ridge form to it, and very few undercuts, if any. This is a denture I would have expected to have a lot of problems out of on retention, and we didn't. It was amazing how much retention we got. All right, so not real well defined palatal rugae, so I'm going to just more or less go about right there. All right, let's refer back to Tim's little picture. So he goes right from the back of the rugae and is going to make this kind of oval thumbprint shape connecting back here. So I'm going to go ahead now and outline that shape. Again, use your erase function to clean that up a little bit. All right, so that looks pretty good. And then I'll make a face group there. And then if you notice also on his image, he's going to have this doing a straight line down from that arc going midway between the midline and the hamular notch. And so that would be, let's say, right there. And so this, I'll just select it all again. And then on this side, about right there. Okay, so that should be all of our landmark identification. Again, I just like Mesh Mixer because it does give me the ability to do this, the landmark identification. Here, I got a little out of concentric with this, so I'm going to just clean this up. Again, you've probably got a lot of latitude in how you do this, and again, once you process this denture, you've always got the ability to grind this out and make it less aggressive. And so I don't think you need to get too bent out of shape as you experiment with doing this. All right. So for starters, how are we going to do our carving on, a model like this, right? We don't have the ability to use like a cleoid tool on a stone model. And so what I'm going to do is, again, reference back to what is he carving. All right, so if I outline this, the U shape, and the very posterior border, that's all 1 millimeter deep. All right, so let's just select that first. Now, I can, at any point, deselect using that erase function. And then we want to identify that very posterior border. All right, so we've got that selection. Now, number of ways you could do this. You could, if you were really trying to keep this simple, you could just simply come in here and use like a sculpting tool and maybe use the deflate tool and just manually draw this in. I was trying to be a little bit more precise than that. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, since I wanted exactly 1 millimeter, I'm going to go to Edit under the selection menu and click Offset. All right, now let me just show you the difference here. Right now it's defaulting to offset to 0.25 millimeters. If I just accept that, I want you to see here that what I get is that surface has been, it's a new surface that's created here, and it's been grown essentially in every direction by 0.25. All right, so, and it's come off of the front of the mesh. All right, so I'm going to call this the front side of the mesh, whereas this would be the back. So if you offset in a positive direction, you're going to come off this way. Well, think about him. He's digging into the model. So I'm going to Control Z and go back a step here. So if I wanted to dig in 1 millimeter, I could say -1. And now you see the difference here is it's created that new surface underneath it. All right. Now, while this is still selected orange, all right, I'm going to come up here and use the separate function to turn that into its own separate mesh. All right, separate, the hotkey is Y, and hopefully you see now this is a completely independent mesh, from the original one that I had. Smooth that little spot. All right, so now I've got this independent mesh here. It's facing the opposite direction. I would like it to face the same direction as my current denture base. So I could select all of this by using a select tool, but under select, you could just go under modify and say there's select all. Control A is the hotkey. All right, so if I just hit Control A, it selects it all. And then to turn that inside out, I would go under the selection menu to edit and flip normals. All right, and now you see how that's been flipped inside out. That's the direction I want this facing. All right, so since I am trying to be a little bit more precise, the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a lesser known feature of Mesh Mixer called magnetize. All right, so we've got two surfaces here in our objects browser. In your objects browser, you're going to see a little magnet. I'm going to click it for the part that I offset by 1 millimeter. All right, and then going back to this model, I'm going to go under the sculpting tools and choose attract. All right, and this is where it's really helpful to have those visual lines that we've created here. All right, so what this does is if I sit on this tool here, all right, I left click, and what is it doing? It is attracting it or pulling it down to whatever surface you've got designated as the magnet. So now that tells me I'm exactly pulling this down 1 millimeter because that's what the underlying surface is. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this on this whole posterior border and on this U shape. I'll time lapse this so you don't have to sit there and watch that whole thing. All right, so now I can demagnetize that, and you can actually see how those meshes are seeing through one another. That's because they're basically the same surface. All right, if I was to hide that now, you can see that I've dug in an exactly 1 millimeter deep line in those areas, the very posterior border and this U shape. All right, let's go back to Tim's tutorial. Basically everywhere else in these areas, right? So these 4 little triangles that you're going to end up with, those areas you want to be dug in 0.5 millimeter. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, a number of ways you could do this. Since I already have like a good reference of this is exactly 1 millimeter, I could probably do this manually and it would be just fine. I'm going to use a different feature. I'm going to just come in and use my select tool and go right from where it transitions from that 1 millimeter . All right, I'm going to select that. Now, how could we more or less dig this in? Now, I'm not going to try to be as exact on this. Really, my goal would be just, I want it tapered from, no relief down to my 1 millimeter ditches. All right, so there's a cool feature called Erase and Fill. The hotkey is F. If I hit F, you see what that's done? But the feature that makes this useful is that you've got this slider here called bulge. and you see what happens when I play with that bulge slider. And so really what I'm trying to do is just slide this thing to where it looks like I'm getting a smooth tapered transition from, again, my basic inside of my model, or the surface of my model, tapering down into that area. All right, so that looks pretty darn good. So again, I'll time lapse this. I'm going to do that for all 4 of those areas. Okay, so now you can see that I have gone ahead and created those tapering zones, and then at last you can kind of do just some manual smoothing. I don't want to go making big alterations, so I usually use this robust smooth tool about halfway on the strength, and then whatever spot size you want for it. And I'll just kind of tap on these transitions. I don't want it to be a straight 90-degree angle up to any of these areas. And so I'll just kind of tap my way around any area that I think looks a bit too rough or like it's a sharp transition. I'll just smooth it briefly. All right, so I've got all of that smoothed out. And then again, he points out that this is kind of an optional step, but that last portion that he did was, on a stone model, he actually put in kind of a lead foil or some kind of foil that built out some thickness on that. And that basically is the thumbprint shape just inside of your areas that have been carved out. So I'm going to just manually outline this. Alright, so I'll show you one other cool feature, and this is a different way of approaching it, and you could have done the whole thing this way, but if I wanted to build in relief on that, I could come up here to offset. I don't know from his tutorial what is the thickness of that foil, alright, but it can't be that much, and so what I've done thus far is I've just made that be like 0.25 millimeters, alright, and I have no basis for that other than that was my best guess at what it probably would have been for the thickness of that foil. Alright, so again, positive direction. Do you see how it's built it out this way a little? Alright, I could go ahead and hit Y, and now that's its own surface. But here's the other way you could have approached that. Let's hide that for a second. So the exact same color group or whatever that I just did here, and I should have created a face group so that I didn't lose that shape. Alright, I could just maybe hit B, which is smooth, and then delete that. Alright, with the goal being to remerge that with this part. Alright, so if I click both of these, let's combine them back. And now, to combine them, I could, or to rejoin them, if I double click that boundary, you're trying to double click a very edge triangle of a hole. Alright, so here's a very edge triangle, double click, and that just selects that boundary. And if you were wanting to be able to see those triangles, hit W on your keyboard. That turns on the wireframe. But once I have 2 borders selected that are in proximity of one another, you can hit J. Alright, J is the join tool, and you would find that under the edit menu. That's right here. Again, hotkey is J. And then final step, just maybe go back and again touch that up right there. I had a little rough spot. Everywhere else this looks pretty good. Okay, so that would be kind of a finalized Luckman post dam. And so again, I made one of these for this particular case. Let me show you the actual denture. So remember, I made that on a model. And so now if I was to bring that model into a design software, Blue Sky Plan, ExoCAD, 3Shape, then it's going to build the surface of that denture directly to the model, and the resulting denture, it will look like this. So it'll be a negative of that shape that I created. and you can kind of make this out. Right here is that deeper U shape. I'm being sloppy on my drawing, but this is all 1 millimeter, and then you had your little tapering zones right here. That's 0.5 millimeter, and then this I offset positive direction by 1/4 millimeter. All right, so that's kind of how this thing looks. And again, as a split test, I made this exact same denture, one with this post dam, one without, and again, night and day different on the retention. It was really impressive. And so you see, this was our patient. This was the final denture that we delivered. He was, really happy with it. Great retention on it. Had to actually work with him on how to blow air up under it and dislodge the thing because it was such a good fit. So if you're doing digital dentures, or if you're doing conventional dentures, I'd really suggest looking into this thing, talking with your lab if you're having them make it, and try to have them build this in and give it a try. And if your experience is anything like mine, I think it'll be something that you end up doing routinely with your dentures. Just be aware if they do have palatal tori or something like that, you're going to have to work around that aspect. The tori are not going to be compressible like normal, palatal tissue would be. But otherwise, palatal tissue is pretty thick, pretty spongy, and as best I can describe it, this just makes a really great suction effect in the palate. So I wish someone would come up with something similar for the mandible, but until then, I think this is a great step. We'll just do it for the maxilla. Anyway, hope you found that helpful.